Welcome to part 9 of the tutorial series on how to create maps for UT2004. Today we're going to discuss optimizing your map. So far you have been mapping away, I think, adding stuff, adding models, maybe adding some brushes as well, like creating your whole map. And, well, for sure on a modern PC it will run, most likely run just fine. But we still got to remember if we're using an engine and technology from 2004 here. So we can't expect it to render like millions of polygons at once. So we have to help it along. So today we're going to discuss a few things. One thing that you're already familiar with was zoning. I think 2 tutorials ago. Yeah. Is it true? No, even in part 6? No, 5 even. That was a while ago. In part 5, we already discussed zoning. Zoning is used to zone off your map, like create rooms per se. So if you're in one room and you can't see the other, it won't be rendered, basically. That concept also optimizes it. Excuse me. So yeah, that's a part that we won't cover today. Um, but yeah, we'll discuss other parts that I haven't covered so far. So the basic thing to start off with is BSP/geometry. So that's the clay or the building blocks per se, like this kind of stuff. The yellow subtractive and the additive brushes. You should keep these only as basic as possible. You should not be creating models with this because it's not efficient to do so. It's also prone to errors. So static meshes, these wireframe looking things at the back here as well, um, are just way faster for your computer, for your graphics card to render them. So yeah, they can be way more complex than geometry/BSP ever can be. Um, so yeah, that's one thing. You should keep it to basic shapes. So like you obviously need to carve out your room, and then you can use some basic slopes or something else to create with BSP. But yeah, like nothing complex. Don't make a sphere or like, well, you can do, but I suggest you just do it in Blender or 3ds Max or some other modeling software instead, because it's way more efficient to do that. Um, yeah, so use static meshes for actual detail. Try to keep the basic level geometry, so where your player is walking on or needs to walk on, as much BSP as possible. You can create a whole map out of static meshes if you want. But yeah, that's just some trial and error that you need to do. The only thing you shouldn't be doing, so for example, you have a brush, this one right here. You can convert it to a static mesh if you want, but if you go to right click, where was it? Convert to static mesh. Let's say my level, so it gets included into my level, test one, and then I should be able to find it in here. And there we go. That's a weapon locker. As you can see, the mesh is exactly the same, but it just responds differently to lighting, basically. And yeah, it should basically be avoided at all costs because it's just not as good with lighting as well. Just the way it gets converted, I think it has to do something with the way the normals are done or something else. I'm not really sure why, but old discussions and old forum posts all uh, tell you to avoid this feature. For really basic stuff, maybe you can use it, but like I said, like see if it works for you. If it does, great. But try to model your own stuff as much as possible. So let's throw that away. Yeah, we already talked about zoning in part 5. There's also another trick to optimize your map. So, for example, this is one big room. So if you have like an outside level or a really big area, how are you going to hide these things that are behind a wall or a slope or whatever? If they're behind a wall, you can obviously use zones. But in a big map, that's going to be quite, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's not ideal. Um, to hide stuff like this, You can use something called a anti-portal. Um, I would say, as the name suggests, it does what it says on the tin, but an anti-portal is basically a volume or space. So I'll create a cube here. It should not be a weird shape before we start, because otherwise, yeah, it can't be like this. This doesn't work, so it has to be like something like this. I think this will work. Let's try to match the shape of the thing. Obviously, you want it as uh, close and inside of a geometry as much as possible. Because what this thing, an antiportal, does is it basically um, deletes, or like hides everything that you can see through it. So I'll just make it like this. So you create an antiportal by clicking on this little button right here. And you will notice a orange brush appears. And this is your antiportal. And I believe if you, no, it doesn't work. Yeah, it does. So if you do live preview now and go into wireframe where you can actually see it, you can see the rocks in the distance are all being stopped rendering. They still cast the shadows because it's baked lighting. I'll do it like this. You will see the same effect as you would have by a zone, but now you have a volume in your level, a point in space, if you reckon, or a volume in space. So if you look through this, sort of like a window-ish, then anything that you're viewing through this window will get stopped rendering, as you see. And if you go this way, then the same thing happens. So this is used as a trick to optimize outdoor maps. So ideally, you want them like sunken into the terrain or like sunken into um, your actual level or like geometry, because you don't want to have this visible like so. Otherwise, it just looks really bad, and otherwise it won't be as effective as if it was like embedded in here. Like you basically don't want the player to notice. So if you're like running up to this, um, it should hide stuff, as you see. But when you get above the line, like not like this is just bad example, but yeah, the player should not be able to um, see through the window at a certain point, if you get what I mean. So if you're like this, everything gets stops rendering. But at a certain point, they will reach over that hill or like increst or whatever or slope. But yeah, you see, there's still nothing here. That's because they're still looking through the anti-portal window per se. So you don't want that. You want the anti-portal as much as possible in the geometry or the slope or whatever. So players won't be able to see um, through it when they're on top of it, basically. So yeah, that's a good. I will show a quick example of a onslaught map, the way they did it. So let's go with Tor1, for example. Tor1 also has a few of them. You'll spot them right here. So what they did is just make a cube or like a sort of shape. So if you stand here, if you go into wireframe mode and you play it, you will see stuff stops rendering because we are looking through that window basically. So yeah, so I hope you kind of get the point of those. So anything behind this, the other side is basically not rendered if you stand at this level. Then in theory it should not be rendered, but yeah, it's a bit inconsistent sometimes. So yeah, that's one way of doing it. But yeah, use them sparingly because they have a decent amount of runtime cost. So yeah, try to create as few as possible. Try to create one that covers as much as you need. So don't have like 20 or like 30 or 40 of them. Well, you can do that, but yeah, see if the performance impact is enough or not. Um, Yeah, you can also use them if the zoning optimization doesn't work as you expected it to do. So you can also place them inside a uh, wall, for example. But yeah, that's up to you to decide. Um, there's also a few other tricks. So by default, every static mesh casts a shadow. So you have some shadows here from the lights. You have a shadow here. You have some shadows here and here. Um, yeah, but when for details outside the playable area that you won't see, you should turn these off to save on rendering time and save on the map size quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but every little bit helps because you don't need to save the extra shadows of places that won't be visible to viewers or to people. So what you want to do is go into the static mesh properties, go to display, and then go to shadowcast off, and then hit rebuild. And you will see it stops being processed by the raycasting slash shadow engine, or whatever you want to call it, lighting engine. Also, one thing you should do outside of it, props outside of the play area is set B use dynamic lights to false. What this doesn't show anything visually, but it means dynamic lights like your muzzle flash, certain explosions maybe won't be projected on top of this mesh, and it saves. I haven't measured it, but it might save some memory runtime or something. Like, yeah, just turn it off on parts on like models that are outside of the playable area to save some space and maybe some memory usage at runtime. And if you really want to go for it, you can set them even to unlit, so they won't be lit at all by the lighting engine. So they just stay as they are, unlit basically. That won't be affected. As you can see, it's more like darker tone. And if you set to unlit, it's basically full bright, as the name implies. So let's set that back. Let's set it back to shadow casting, and let's set dynamic lights to true. And now it's back to normal. Yeah, another thing you should use on on smaller details, I would say, is to set a call distance. A call distance is basically a distance in in your world or in your map whereby the static mesh will stop rendering. So by default it's set to 0 because, well, it means that it won't call itself, so it won't stop rendering. So if you set this to like 1 or like maybe like 10 maybe, then you will see that the meshes have disappeared. They're even not rendered anymore basically. The shadows are still there because, well, once again, baked lighting, they bake into the texture. But the closer you get to the actor, that's not a great example, set to like 100 or something, you'll see it will start popping in. And this also works in game. So if we go to play it now, you will see the same effect. And the same effect for the anti-portal also is visible here. You can see it flashing in and out of existence. Then you can see the same thing for these things. So that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. And even if they're not rendered, they still have collisions on them. So don't think that because they're not being rendered, they don't have collisions on them. They do. So yeah, be aware of that. So let's exit out of there and go back. So that's something you can use. Let's set it back to 0. Another trick you can use, no, we're coming back to this, to call distance. I suggest you set this for like things like blades of grass and then like maybe small rocks or something. Not like big things like these hills or like these rock mountains or whatever, or big vehicles like this. You should keep it to small details. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but yeah, for a consistency sake, I would try to use the call distance for like small objects that our player won't really notice disappear and appear in the background, because this is just a fade, like a on or off. Like modern engines fade them in and fade them out, so the transition is smoother. But it's just here, it's off or on, basically. So the transition is like on off, so a lot more harsh per se. Um, is there something else? Yes, there is. Also for actors that are outside of the playable area, I suggest you turn off collision, because this saves some memory used at runtime, I believe, because the engine doesn't need to calculate a rocket or a player hitting it and calculate the physics for it and collision and stuff. So by doing that, for to do that is double click on a static mesh, set everything to false. So this will mean projectiles, rockets, players can move through it, bullets will go through it, everything. So only use this on either small details that you don't want players to get stuck on, and are fine with having players shoot through, or like once again outside objects that simply don't need collision at all. And one thing to also keep in mind when it comes to collision is if you go into your static mesh browser and you go to materials, open it, there's also a enable collision flag here. If you need bullets, bullet impacts on your, if you need basically need pinpoint accurate collision, use enable collision on the material, because if you shoot a metal box, this is not a metal box, but then the texture will be metal, so it will show metal sparks exactly where it lands. But this does have a memory cost because the engine needs to process the complete model for that to work. So like a simple model like this with 60 triangles, that's actually fast, but like a really big complex model, it's slowing the game down quite a bit. So either like selectively turn that off. If you turn this off, then it will use the collision hull that's around it, and by default there is none. You can set one up by the collision tools. So for example, I'll do a 18 one and then hit show collision, and you will see a pink-ish shape around it. This is the new collision hull that the game will use. Uh, there's also some changes here you can do. So karma collision is basically the physics engine. So if you smash yourself, your dead body into this, then the it will hit the pink collision hull around it will process the hit. Not the mesh itself, but the collision hull around it. Same goes for player movement, and I think projectiles as well. So if I set this to true, then I won't be stopped by the mesh itself. I will be stopped by the collision box. And if you do simple line collision, then shots, hit scan shots like snipers, assault rifles, minigun shots, everything else that hit scan also gets blocked. So instead of you hitting the actual mesh, you will hit this part, and depending on how you set it up, it will look fine. But yeah, since this is a attempt of a sphere, no, a cylinder, sorry. um, yeah, it might look a little bit weird, but play around with it. So, yes, there is. So there's also two flags you can set under advanced, and then high detail and super high detail. The name might give away what it does. So let's set this one to be high detail and set these two to be super high detail. Save it, render it, play it. And what this does is controls when a mesh is visible um, under certain settings in the menu, graphic settings. So for example, will detail is set to high. This is what high and super high is. So if I set this to normal, you will see the two on the back have disappeared. Like if you type R mode 1, they're not being rendered anymore. If you set this one lower to like low, then all of them are gone. So that means the high detail one is gone as well. So this one can also be used for like smaller meshes that are not really visible by the player to help optimize your map further. So you can specify like, oh, this is a highly detailed mesh. People with like a high-end PC back then, nowadays will probably won't have an issue with that, but yeah, you can selectively say, oh, these meshes are high detail, only reserve these for high uh, people with high-end PCs. But once again, and I keep telling it, making sure that you guys understand, shadows are still being like visible because yeah, it's rendered once and then projected onto the texture itself of the map. So yeah, there's not a lot you can do about that unless you set shadow cast to false, but then it looks weird when you're actually playing it. So yeah, it's a trade-off. Let's get back to the editor. Yeah, there's also a thing you can do when it comes to zoning as well. So for example, um, your zoning is not really working as expected. For some reason, a mesh is still visible, even though you're in a completely different room. What you can do is click on the mesh, go into advanced, no, it's display, and you have a tag, force visibility zone tag. So what this means, or what it accepts, is a tag from a zone. I will need to add a zone. Where are you? Info, zone info. Add an info here, and it will look for the events and then the tag. So this is the zone info, but ideally you want this named something else. So what the engine will do is say, hey, the player is in zone 1. The actor, the static mesh is set up to only render in zone 1. I will show it, but as soon as the player leaves zone 1, I'm gone. No matter what the zoning portals look like, if you're in zone 1, you're visible. Even if you can still see into zone 1, it will stop rendering because you're not in zone 1 basically. So, and one thing to quickly show that, I think, would be to go into zone test, name this one zone, oh, zone 1, and this one is a bit broken, so let's quickly fix that. Um, this one doesn't have an empty portal, so let's split up that room like so. Just to quickly do it. Um, yeah, let's add a mesh in here. So I have this big green thing, and let's say I want this only visible in zone info 2. So I set the event tag, the tag there. I set this one to only display in zone info 2. Render it and then play it. And when we move to zone 1, with those, that's the room with the barrels basically, then this mesh will stop being rendered.
Play.
So if we move out of here, well, that's kind of climactic. It should work. It doesn't seem to do it. Was there something with the zoning maybe? No, that's actually correct. Hmm. It's weird. It should stop rendering here, but let's see if I can move it around maybe. Zone info 2. Zone info 2. Yeah, that's should work, but let's try again, I guess. And if not, then I guess I have been mistaken.
Play.
No, weird. Weird. Okay, well, I guess we'll leave for that what it is. So in theory it should work as I described it, but for some reason it's not doing it. So let's get back. Let's go to the map that I made. Yeah, also use fog. You can also use fog to, especially on large outdoor maps, to give your map atmosphere, but also to optimize your map by just hiding everything that's behind the fog, as discussed in the zoning tutorial, how to create fog as well there. Avoid having many asset packages that are required to play a map. So don't have like 20 different texture packages and 10 different music packages and sound packages. Just try to keep them in one or two if possible. It's also easier for you to ship your map that way. Spawning in objects is relatively expensive, so emitters and other kinds of things should be avoided as much as possible, or use them only as high detailed things. So you can also set particles, because emitters emit particles, to be high detail or super high detail. So it's also one way of doing it. But spawning in is relatively expensive of these things. Every pickup on the map creates a channel. When playing on a server, the more channels on the server, the more lag there will be. So try using as little pickups as possible. Or what you want to do, if you have a map that you want um, like 5-6 weapons, so instead of creating 5-6 weapon pickup points, you just create a weapon locker instead, and a weapon locker can be accessed from pickup and then weapon locker, and it will look like this. You may have seen it on some maps, and you can set what weapons will be in here. So let's add a redeemer for walls, and let's add a minigun. So instead of having to add a redeemer, weapon pickup, and a minigun pickup, you can just have one which has multiple things. So as you can see, there's the redeemer and there's the minigun. So yeah, cool stuff. So try using these if you have, or if you want a lot of pickups on your map, basically, on in one confined space. So these ones will be really handy for that. Um, yeah. So far we have been using solid brushes, so which are actually fine. Like for basic geometry, it's actually fine, but it does create cuts, and cuts can be easily shown by going into the zone portal mode, and you will see a lot of cuts have been made around this circle, or this, yeah, whatever. I'm kind of lost for words for some reason. Cylinder, there we go. Come on. Yeah, you can see a lot of cuts being made because that's the way BSP works. It cuts stuff up, and yeah, I don't really know the exact stuff, but yeah, all I know, it cuts stuff up, and you don't want as much cuts as possible. So one way to avoid this is either use a static mesh, but if you for some reason need to use a geometry, you can convert a solid brush, so the blue ones are solid, to a semi-solid brush, and you go to type, and non-solid, obviously it will not have collision at all. So if you set it to semi-solid, it will turn pink, just like the collision thing was. And if you rebuild your map, if you go to zoning portal again, you'll see it's not cutting around it anymore, and the number of cuts in your map will also be greatly reduced. So try using this for like decorative brushes, like stairs, or stairs are also like not decorative, but are also uh, player focus, so players need to walk on them. Use them for complex stuff like that, like stairs or like pillars or stuff like that. That might create a lot of cuts in your level. Um, but yeah, they do not create cuts in the geometry around them. Reducing the node count and the likelihood of BSP errors, like the Hall of Mirrors, basically, and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, but they don't count for walls. And what I mean by that, well, they do count as a wall, but uh, for example, if you have a floor made of a semi-solid and the rest is a solid room, if you place um, a zone portal as you would in the zoning tutorial map, the engine does not treat the floor as a solid surface. So it thinks like, oh, you can still look through it anyway. So it will basically stop just working zones. Zones won't work. There we go. So yeah, try not to use them as floors that need to be zoned off. So if you have a a room like this, do not make sure the bottom floors or anything else are semi-solids, because then this trick with the zoning doesn't work. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, don't subtract from semi-solids. Do not create like a cube and then try to cut out a piece like so, because this will simply not work. Yeah, well, it does work, but it's not designed to work, because cutting out stuff, so subtracting something from a solid brush, so a blue brush like this one, is supported, but not a semi-solid or a non-solid. So do not use that. Um, they might have some collision issues, so you might, excuse me, want to put collision volumes around them, but yeah, collision will be discussed later on. You should also avoid having semi-solids like this, so they merge into each other, because the way they are semi-solid, then they have some weird bugs with collision and rendering and other things like that. So do not try get this stuff to work. Like put at least like one block of space between them if possible. They can touch, but it's best to leave a little space. Do not also make weird shapes out of them, because they simply don't like that. Um, so yeah, try keeping some distance between them and keep the shape simple. Do not create like a really complex shape out of them. You also should keep in mind a 2:1 poly ratio. To display the poly ratio, you go into the build options and you go into statistics. The ratio is 1 to 14.1 currently, but yeah, try to keep it 2:1. A lower node count, I believe, is better. So the less nodes you have, the better. Fewer polys as well, because yeah, the more polys it will take to render. Um, yeah, brushes should also be kept at a minimal as much as possible, as discussed in the beginning. Yeah, you can mess around, but leave these settings as they are. They are default, they are good, they work, they don't cause issues. There are some Unreal Editor gurus out there that know what this actually does, but simply put, do not touch it. It's good as it is. The lighting we have talked about, set this to RGB8 for the best quality, and DXT301 if you want to really compress your map. So we have talked about setting meshes to unlit, but you can also set surfaces to unlit. For example, if I stand like this and this is the border of the map, and I will never see this, just set this to unlit. Or what you can do is set to invisible. But yeah, you won't see the change here, but in game, no, when you actually start loading or actually the play mode or in game, you'll see the changes. So the game does not have to render this phase of the material. So yeah, use this trick for geometry that's outside the playable area, or set it to unlit and visible on places that players won't see. So the engine doesn't have to spend time texturing it and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. Um, yeah, there is a thing called merging of polygons. I think I have a thing for that maybe, or maybe not. One thing you can do, I think it's not but this one. No, it needs to be added a solid brush. So, for example, if I create like a quick H, there he is. So let's quickly create a H pattern of solid brushes. So there, one here, fine, and then one in the middle. Yeah, it's basically broken. Not to be unexpected because, well, it's on the outer and this program hates me. So let's try that again with something bigger. Sure, that works. So this is basically a this is based of three brushes basically. So, and in the earlier tutorials you have seen the intersect thing. So we'll also do that here. So we'll make these three brushes one. So let's create a quick box around it with some room in between. Then intersect it. Oh, that's something else. There we go. So we have created one brush out of three separate ones. Let's build this one. So we can remove this one now. And what you guys want to do is you have three different polygons basically here. So this one, and this one. But there is a possibility that you can merge them all into one. So if you do it like this, right click on the mesh and then polygons and merge them. It will reduce the poly count because you can merge three polygons into one basically. And use two other parts. I believe maybe the bottom. No, why is it not working? That's weird. It should. Oh wait, the other parts kind of separate. Okay. So let's get a quick stare then. And this one will have each stair has its own segment per se. So this one will be reduced from all these polygons into one big one basically. So if you right click again, polygons merge, then wait, that's weird. It should work, but it's nah, for some reason it's not. Oh, you need to rebuild. Sorry. And it's the same for this thing now. It's not. Okay. Yeah, it is. So these two are now part of the same polygon, and this one is still separate. But this one is one big polygon now. So to make the change happen, you will need to rebuild the geometry at least. So this is also a way to save on polygons in your map. So yeah, that's kind of the whole shebang about the optimizing your map. There's multiple ways of doing it. Zoning is one of the most powerful ones, I would say. Anti-portals are useful for outside maps. So is the cull distance, fog, and high detail and super high detail options are also useful inside as well, but more outside, more for outside levels. The merging of polygons, yeah, is something you can do, but it's only limited to brushes or shapes that are made by a single brush, so a stair or the intersected H pattern that we made. And then again, it's not gonna save you a lot of polygons. And if you're worried about saving polygons for geometry, then try looking into a way of converting that shape into a static mesh instead, because it will be a lot and a lot faster to render than geometry will be. So keep that in mind as well. So yeah, and the unlit stuff, shadow casting, everything else, just see limit that usage as much as possible to outside areas of your map that players won't see, or to small details that do not reach shadows or something like that. But once again, experiment with it. Try not to create things like this. Um, so a player should never see this. Basically, this doesn't look nice. A player doesn't want to see this. So yeah, try avoiding having unlit or invisible areas visible to the player. So yeah, there you go. Um, yeah, the next tutorial will be covering ambient sounds. So far our map has been dead silent, but we will tackle that topic next time. So hope to see you guys there.